She parks in the spot with her name on the deed, and a man with a badge decides she doesn't belong there. That's how it starts. A concrete garage in the middle of downtown Cedar Falls, Ohio. A woman in jeans and sneakers standing next to her car, saying for words as calm as still water, "I own this garage." A cop laughing in her face. A tow truck already rolling. And 40 minutes later, that same cop standing frozen while his own deputy chief calls this woman Ms. Whitmore in front of half the county courthouse staff. By the end of this story, a badge won't save him. A pension won't save him. Nothing will save him, because the woman he humiliated signs his paycheck, whether he ever finds it out in time or not. Before we get into it, drop in the comments where you're watching from tonight. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, because next week we've got one coming that might be the biggest reveal we've ever told. You don't want to miss it. Now, let's go back to the morning it all started. Cedar Falls, Ohio isn't a big city, but it acts like one downtown. 5 blocks of brick storefronts, a courthouse with actual marble steps, a city hall that still has its original 1920s clock tower, and in the middle of all of it, sandwiched between the two, the Cedar Falls Municipal Parking Garage, 5 levels of gray concrete, exhaust-stained pillars, humming fluorescent lights that flicker on the lower floors like they're thinking about giving up. It's not a beautiful building, but it's a busy one. Judges park there. City clerks park there. Cops on courthouse duty park there. And on the ground floor, behind a wall of glass, there's a booth with blue and white lettering across the top. Whitmore Municipal Parking Solutions. That's not decoration. That's a name on a city contract. Whitmore Municipal Parking Solutions runs this garage, enforcement, maintenance, signage, towing authority, all of it, under a deal with the city that's been in place for 6 years and up for renewal in 4 months. Renee Whitmore doesn't usually walk her own garages. She's got 22 people on payroll who do that. But lately, complaints have been landing on her desk about this particular garage. Nothing dramatic on paper, just a pattern. Tows issued without warnings. Citations written up wrong. A name that keeps showing up in every complaint. Officer Dale Whitfield, Cedar Falls PD, assigned as the department's parking enforcement liaison for the downtown corridor. So on a gray Tuesday morning in March, Renee does what she always does when something smells wrong in one of her operations. She doesn't send someone else. She goes and looks herself. She's 41 years old, wearing jeans, a plain gray jacket, sneakers with a little salt stain around the toe from the melting snow on the sidewalk. Her hair's pulled back simple. No makeup to speak of. She looks like exactly what she is on any given Tuesday. A woman running errands, not a woman running a company. That's never bothered her. She built Whitmore Municipal Parking Solutions from 3 trucks and a folding table to a company that manages contracts in 4 counties, and not $1 of that came from convincing people she was somebody the moment she walked into a room. It came from the work. She's never needed the room to guess right. She pulls her gray sedan into level 2, the level reserved for city contractors and facility inspectors, marked by a small aluminum placard bolted to the wall. Easy to miss if you're not looking for it. Easy to see if you are. There's a matching placard on her dashboard, government-issued, current, laminated. She's parked in this exact spot at least 30 times in the last 2 years. Nobody's ever said a word to her about it. She steps out, phone in hand, already thumbing open the inspection app her team uses to log issues. A hairline crack running along a support column on level 3. A burnt-out light fixture near the stairwell. A payment kiosk on level 1 that's been down for 2 days according to the maintenance log nobody followed up on. She's maybe 4 minutes into her walk when she hears boots on concrete behind her, unhurried, deliberate, the kind of walk that wants to be heard before it wants to be seen. "Ma'am." She turns. A Cedar Falls patrol officer, mid-40s, thick through the shoulders, sunglasses pushed up on his head even though the garage is dim enough to need the fluorescence. His name tag reads D. Whitfield. He's got one hand resting on his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough to it that it reads as a choice. "Morning," Renee says. Even. Unbothered. "This level's reserved," Whitfield says. "Contractors and city inspectors only. You need to move your vehicle." "I know," Renee says. "It's parked correctly." He looks past her toward the gray sedan, like he's checking his own eyes. "That your car?" "It is." You got a placard for that? On the dash. She doesn't reach for her wallet. Doesn't reach for anything, actually. Just stands there, phone still in her hand, mid-inspection, like this conversation is a minor interruption to something more important she's already doing. Which, from where she's standing, it is. Whitfield's jaw does something small. A tightening. The kind of look a man gets when the answer he was expecting doesn't match the answer he received, and instead of adjusting, he just repeats the question louder in his head. I'm going to need you to show me some ID, he says. And I'm going to need to see documentation that you're authorized to park on this level. Because in my experience, and here his voice picks up a little performance to it, like there's an audience he's already imagining. Folks who actually work these contracts don't dress like they're headed to the gym. Across the level, near the attendant booth by the stairwell, a young man in a Whitmore Municipal Parking Solutions polo shirt has just clocked what's happening. Marcus Bell, 29 years old, 3 years on this job, knows exactly who Renee Whitmore is. He's stocked her office with coffee. He's called her cell phone at midnight when a pipe burst on level 4. He opens his mouth like he's about to cross the floor and put a stop to this before it starts. Then he stops himself, because he's also watched over the last few months exactly what kind of Officer Dale Whitfield is when someone questions him in front of other people. And some instinct, some old, tired, familiar instinct, tells Marcus that whatever's about to happen here, it needs to happen all the way, out in the open, where it can't be walked back later. So he stays by the booth, watching, waiting. Renee looks at Whitfield for a long moment, not with anger, not with fear, just with the flat, patient attention of someone who has been underestimated before more times than she could count, and has learned that the fastest way through it is never to raise her voice to match the other person's volume. Officer, she says quietly, I'd be happy to answer your questions, but I think you're about to make a mistake. Whitfield's hand shifts slightly on his belt. Somewhere behind him, a tow truck, the one he called in on his radio 30 seconds before he ever said a word to her, turns a corner onto level 2, engine idling low, ready to hook a chain to the front axle of her car. The tow truck's headlights swing across the concrete pillars as it rolls to a stop about 20 feet behind Renee's sedan, and for the first time since he approached her, Officer Dale Whitfield's mouth twitches into something like a smile. See, I already had a feeling, he says, so I called it in before I even walked over. Saves everybody time. Renee's eyes move once, to the truck, then back to him. She doesn't flinch. You called a tow before you asked me a single question. I asked you plenty, Whitfield says. You didn't have answers I liked. You asked if this was my car. I said yes. You asked if I had a placard. I said it's on the dash. That's 2 questions, and I answered both of them. Her voice stays level, almost gentle, the tone of someone explaining something to a person who should already know it. You haven't looked at the placard yet. I don't need to look at a piece of laminated paper to know somebody's not supposed to be on a restricted level, Whitfield says. I've worked this garage 2 years. I know what a contractor looks like. I know what a facility inspector looks like. And with all due respect, the phrase comes out like a formality, not a courtesy. You don't fit either one. Behind them, near the attendant booth, Marcus Bell's hands have gone still on the counter. He's watching a man decide what a person is worth before checking a single fact. And he's watched enough of these moments in his life to know exactly how badly they can go if nobody steps in. But he also knows something Whitfield doesn't. And some part of him, the part that's tired of watching people like Whitfield get away with this every single time, wants the whole thing to play out until there's no possible way to spin it later. Officer, Renee says, walk to my dashboard. It's right there. It'll take you 4 seconds. I'm not going to be told how to do my job, bye. He stops himself, doesn't finish the sentence. But everyone in earshot hears the shape of the word that almost came out, even unsaid. Renee's expression doesn't change. If anything, it goes stiller, more composed, the way a lake goes flat right before weather moves in. By who, Officer Whitfield? By somebody who's already in a spot she's not authorized to be in, he says, recovering. Louder now, performing for whatever version of this moment lives in his head where he's the one in control. You people always got an explanation ready, a story, a reason it's somebody else's fault. Marcus's jaw tightens at the counter. A woman crossing from the stairwell, A court reporter named Diane Kessler, on her way to her own car, slows down, phone halfway into her purse, sensing something worth watching. I haven't told you a story, Renee says quietly. I've told you the truth twice. You're the one who hasn't checked it yet. Whitfield keys his radio without looking away from her. Go ahead and hook it up, he tells the tow driver. Officer. Renee's voice doesn't rise, but something in it sharpens, just slightly. Not anger, but precision, like a blade catching light. If you tow this vehicle without verifying the placard on the dash, you are going to create a problem for yourself that has nothing to do with me. Is that a threat? It's a fact. She holds up her phone, the inspection app still open on the screen, a small company logo in the corner, WMPS, in blue lettering. The same 3 letters stenciled on the wall of the booth 20 feet behind her. She doesn't turn the screen enough for him to actually see it clearly. She's not offering it as proof. She's testing something, watching to see if he'll ask, if he'll look, if procedure means anything to him at all when there's no one senior in the room to make him follow it. I'm asking you one more time to walk to my car and check the placard before that truck touches my bumper. Whitfield looks at the phone in her hand, then at her face, then deliberately, almost theatrically, looks away from both, toward the tow driver hooking a chain beneath the front axle of her sedan. Ma'am, this isn't your spot, he says, and his voice carries now, pitched for the small audience gathering near the stairwell. Diane Kessler, a court clerk. 2 men in suits waiting for the elevator. This level is for people who actually have business here. I don't know what you think you're doing walking around with a phone in your hand like you're somebody, but where I'm standing, all I see is somebody who's about to learn that some rules apply to everybody, including you. The line lands hard in the concrete quiet of the garage. A few feet away, Marcus flinches like he's been struck himself. Renee says nothing for a moment. She looks at the chain locking under her front tire. She looks at Whitfield's face, flushed now, satisfied. Sure, he's won something. You should write that quote down, she finally says, quiet enough that only he and Marcus, straining to listen, can hear it clearly. You're going to want to remember exactly how you said that. Is that supposed to scare me? No, Renee says. It's supposed to be accurate. I find things go easier for everybody when people are accurate. The tow truck's winch groans to life, and her sedan's front end lifts an inch off the concrete. Whitfield reaches for his ticket book, flips it open with a practiced snap of his wrist, already writing before he's even asked her name. I'm also citing you for obstruction of a restricted contractor zone, he says, and unauthorized presence on private commercial property. That's going to be a fine, and depending on how uncooperative you decide to keep being, that could turn into a trespassing charge. On whose property? Renee asks. Whitfield doesn't look up from the ticket book. This garage. City contract. Restricted access. You're not on the list. Which list? The contractor list. Facility inspectors. People with actual business here. He clicks his pen, closed like a period at the end of a sentence he's proud of. People who belong. Marcus finally moves. He steps out from behind the counter, polo shirt tucked, ID badge swinging against his chest, and crosses the level with his hands slightly raised, like he's approaching something that might go off. Officer Whitfield, can I talk to you for a second, actually, before? Not now, Whitfield says, without looking at him. I'm handling this. I really think you should hold off on the tow. Sir, I think there's something you should... I said not now. Whitfield's voice cracks like a whip, sharp enough that Marcus actually stops walking. You work here, you don't run this level. I do when I'm on it. Go back to your booth. Marcus looks past him to Renee, and for a moment their eyes meet, hers calm, almost reassuring, a small and private message passed between 2 people who both know exactly how this is going to end, even if only one of them does yet. She gives him the faintest shake of her head. Not now. Not yet. Marcus stops, steps back, watches. The tow truck pulls forward, Renee's sedan rising fully onto the flatbed now, tires spinning slowly in the air. Whitfield tears the citation from his book and holds it out to her, not quite offering it, more like presenting it. Proof of a job well done. You want to avoid the trespassing charge, he says. I'd suggest you get off this level. Now. And don't come back without an escort next time. Somebody who can actually vouch you belong here. Renee doesn't take the ticket from his hand right away. She looks at it, then at him. "Officer Whitfield," she says. And for the first time, there's something almost like patience in her voice. The patience of a teacher watching a student make a mistake she's already seen coming from 3 streets away. "I want you to understand something. I'm not upset that you stopped me. Officers are allowed to ask questions. What I'm upset about is that you decided the answer before you asked a single one of them." "Save it," Whitfield says. "Tell it to the judge if you want to fight the citation." "I don't think it'll get that far," Renee says. She finally takes the ticket, folds it once, and slides it into her jacket pocket without another word. Behind her, the tow truck's engine revs as it pulls her car up the exit ramp toward level 1, chain rattling against the flatbed, tires still spinning uselessly in the cold March air. She takes out her phone. Not to argue, not to threaten. She simply dials a number, holds it to her ear, and waits, calm as still water. While 3 feet away, Officer Dale Whitfield writes his second citation of the morning and doesn't yet know he's already lost the only version of this story, where he comes out looking like the one in control. Renee's call connects on the second ring. This is Dana. Her assistant's voice, brisk, used to the rhythm of Renee's calls at odd hours. "Dana, it's me. I need you to pull the enforcement contract file for the Cedar Falls Courthouse garage. Send it to my email and copy Deputy Chief Reyes's office at CFPD. She'll know what it's regarding." Renee's voice is level, unhurried, like she's ordering lunch. "Also, I need the tow log for level 2, past 6 months. And pull Officer Dale Whitfield's badge number off today's citation once I send you a photo of it." "On it," Dana says. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Renee says, watching the tow truck disappear around the ramp with her car chained to its bed. "Just cleaning something up." She ends the call and slides the phone into her jacket pocket, next to the folded citation. Across the level, Whitfield is writing something else now, a second sheet, tucked behind the first in his book, and Marcus, still standing near the booth, watches him flip to a fresh page with a sinking feeling that this isn't close to over. "One more thing," Whitfield says, walking back toward her, ticket book still open. "Since you're being so cooperative," the word comes out with an edge of sarcasm sharp enough to draw blood, "I'm also writing you up for trespassing in a restricted contractor zone. That's a separate charge from the parking citation. You want to explain to a judge why you were wandering around a secured level with a phone out, taking pictures of city infrastructure. Go right ahead. I'm sure that'll go great for you." "I wasn't taking pictures of infrastructure," Renee says. "I was logging a maintenance issue. A cracked support column on level 3. It's been on our internal report for 11 days. Our internal report." Whitfield repeats it back to her with a small, incredulous laugh, like she's just handed him the punchline to a joke he didn't know he was telling. "Ma'am, there is no our. You don't work here. You don't own anything here. You're a woman who parked somewhere she shouldn't have and got caught, and now you're spinning a story about maintenance logs and internal reports like that's going to make this go away." He taps his pen against the ticket book. "It won't. I've seen this move 100 times. Everybody's got a story once the truck shows up." By now the small crowd near the stairwell has grown. Diane Kessler, the court reporter, has stopped pretending to look for her keys and is openly watching, phone raised, recording. 2 more people have wandered over from the elevator bank. A paralegal named Tom Reyes Alvarez, no relation to the deputy chief, and a maintenance worker from City Hall who happened to be walking through on a supply run. None of them say anything. They just watch, the way people do when they sense a small piece of history assembling itself in front of them and don't yet know which direction it's going to fall. "Officer," Renee says, and there's something new in her voice now, not anger still, but a kind of finality, like a door quietly closing. "I want to be very clear with you, one time, before this goes any further. I have already called someone. That call is going to matter more than anything either of us says in the next 10 minutes. I'd encourage you to think carefully about what you write on that second citation, because you're going to want it to be accurate. You keep saying that word, accurate." Whitfield tilts his head, and there's something almost gleeful in his face now, the look of a man who thinks he's cornered someone and wants to enjoy it a little before he lets them go. "You know what's accurate, ma'am? You showed up on a restricted level in jeans and sneakers, couldn't produce ID when I asked the first time, got cute with me about a phone app instead of just answering a simple question. And now you're standing here telling me you called someone like that supposed to make me nervous. I've had my badge for 19 years. I've heard every version of "you don't know who I am." It's always the same story, and it never once turns out to be true. "I never said you don't know who I am," Renee says quietly. "I said you'd want your paperwork to be accurate. There's a difference." "Semantics." "No," she says. "It's the difference between a mistake you can still walk back and one you can't." Whitfield laughs, a short, hard sound, more performance than humor, aimed as much at the small crowd by the stairwell as at her. "Lady, the only one who needs to worry about walking anything back is you. You want to file a complaint? Go ahead. Everybody does. Nothing ever comes of it. This is my level. Has been for 2 years. I know every inch of this garage and everybody who's actually supposed to be in it, and you," he says, jabbing his pen toward her, not quite touching her, but close enough that Marcus takes an involuntary step forward, "are not one of them." He rips the second citation free and holds it out. "Trespassing in a restricted commercial zone," he says. "You can pay the fine or you can fight it in front of a judge, but either way, get off this level before I add resisting to the pile. And for what it's worth," he leans in slightly, voice dropping into something meant only for her, though Marcus is close enough to hear every word. "I don't care who you think you called. Nobody's coming to save you from a parking ticket." The garage goes very quiet. Even the fluorescent lights seem to stop their flickering for a moment. Diane Kessler's phone is still recording. Tom Reyes Alvarez has gone still by the elevator. Marcus's hands are shaking slightly at his sides, not from fear, but from the effort of holding himself back one more time. Renee looks down at the second citation in Whitfield's outstretched hand. She doesn't take it right away. "Officer Whitfield," she says, and her voice, for the first time, carries just enough weight that even the paralegal by the elevator leans in to hear it better. "I want you to remember you said that. Word for word. Nobody's coming to save you from a parking ticket." "I'll remember," Whitfield says, smug, already turning half away from her. Done with this. Ready to move on to the rest of his shift. "Trust me, I won't lose sleep over it." Behind him, from his shoulder radio, a burst of static crackles to life. "Unit 14, Unit 14, respond. Deputy Chief Reyes needs you back at the garage location, level 2, immediately." She's already en route. Whitfield's hand freezes halfway to clipping his ticket book shut. He turns his head slightly, frowning at the radio like it said something in a language he doesn't quite recognize yet. "Copy," he says slowly. "What's this regarding?" There's a pause on the other end, just long enough to feel wrong. "She said to tell you," the dispatcher says. "It's regarding the Whitmore contract." For the first time all morning, something flickers across Dale Whitfield's face that isn't confidence. The word sits in the air of the garage, like smoke that hasn't figured out where to go yet. The Whitmore contract. Whitfield's eyes go to Renee, really look at her, for the first time, not as an obstacle to be processed, but as a person, a specific person, someone whose name might mean something he hasn't yet connected. She hasn't moved. She's standing exactly where she was, hands loose at her sides, the second citation still folded and unclaimed between them. What contract? Whitfield says, to no one in particular, mostly to himself. That's when Marcus finally crosses the floor. He doesn't ask permission this time. He doesn't hesitate at the edge of the conversation the way he did 20 minutes ago. He walks straight up to Whitfield, closes the distance between them, and speaks low and fast, like a man finally getting rid of something he's been holding in his chest all morning. "Officer, that's Renee Whitmore," he says. "Whitmore Municipal Parking Solutions. She owns the company that holds the enforcement contract for this whole garage. She's not just a contractor who works here. She's the contractor. The one whose name is on the wall behind you. The one whose company issues your parking authority in this building in the first place." Whitfield turns his head slowly toward the booth, toward the blue and white lettering stenciled across the glass. Whitmore Municipal Parking Solutions. Like he's reading it for the very first time in 2 years of walking past it every single shift. "That's not," he stops. Starts again. "She was parked in jeans. She didn't have credentials on her. She had a placard on her dash," Marcus says. "The one you never checked." And she doesn't carry a badge around because she doesn't need one. She's the reason this whole level exists. She's the reason you have a job standing on it. Diane Kessler, phone still raised, has stopped pretending to look for anything at all. Tom Reyes Alvarez has actually pulled his own phone out now too. A small crowd of maybe 8 or 9 people has gathered near the stairwell. Courthouse employees drawn by the particular gravity that forms whenever something in public starts to go sideways in slow motion. Whitfield lets out a short laugh, but it's thinner now, less certain than the ones before it. Nice story, he says, though his eyes are moving between Marcus and Renee like he's recalculating something. Real nice story. But I'm going to need more than an employee vouching for his boss to believe that a lady standing here in sneakers owns a 5-level parking structure and a city contract. You could have found that out 20 minutes ago, Renee says quietly, if you'd walked to my dashboard like I asked you to. The elevator dings. Deputy Chief Angela Reyes steps out, 52 years old, silver-streaked hair pulled back tight, a city ID badge clipped to her blazer, moving with the unmistakable pace of someone who has already made 3 phone calls on the walkover and is not in the mood for a 4th. She takes the scene in about 2 seconds flat. The tow truck's empty chain marks on the concrete, the small crowd with phones raised, Marcus standing beside Renee like a man guarding something precious, and Whitfield, ticket book still open in his hand, going pale under the fluorescent lights. Officer Whitfield, Reyes says, her voice carrying easily across the level without needing to be raised. Tell me you did not just have this woman's vehicle towed. Chief, she was in a restricted zone. I followed procedure. Did you check the placard on her dashboard before you called the tow? Whitfield's mouth opens, closes. Did you run her plate before you wrote 2 citations? Nothing. Did you at any point in the last 30 minutes? Reyes says, each word landing with the precision of a hammer finding a nail dead center. Ask this woman for her name? The silence that follows is its own kind of answer. Reyes turns to Renee, and her whole posture shifts, not softer exactly, but recalibrated, the way a person's does when they realize who they're actually standing in front of. Ms. Whitmore, she says, I am so sorry. I got a call 20 minutes ago from the city manager's office about a compliance flag on your contract. And when I pulled the incident log for this garage this morning, your name came up attached to a tow that had just gone out. I came down here myself the second I saw it. Every head in the small crowd turns toward Renee at once. Diane Kessler lowers her phone slightly, mouth open. Tom Reyes Alvarez actually takes a step back, like he's reassessing the entire scene he just watched unfold. Whitmore, someone near the stairwell repeats, quiet, almost reverent, like the sign on the booth. Ms. Whitmore, Reyes continues, is the majority owner and CEO of the company that holds the parking enforcement and facility management contract for this entire structure. She has held that contract for 6 years. Every tow authority you have used in this garage for the past 2 years, Officer Whitfield, exists because her company's agreement with this city grants it to you. Whitfield's face has gone the color of the concrete pillar behind him. I didn't, nobody told me. She didn't say anything. She just stood there. She never once said who she shouldn't have had to, Renee says. And it's the first time her voice has risen at all since the confrontation started. Not loud, but clear, cutting cleanly through his stammering. That's the entire point, Officer Whitfield. I didn't say who I was because I wanted to see what you'd do when you thought it didn't matter. I've had complaints on my desk about you for 3 months. Tows without warnings. Citations written up wrong. A pattern is what my team called it, before I ever came down here myself to see if the pattern is real. She takes a slow breath. It's real. Ma'am, Ms. Whitmore, this is a misunderstanding. I can fix this. I can void the citations right now. You can't fix what already happened, Renee says, not unkindly, but without an inch of giving it either. You made a decision about who I was and what I deserved before you ever asked me a single real question. You called a tow truck before you checked a placard. You told me nobody's coming to save me from a parking ticket. Her eyes hold his, steady. Somebody already had. You just didn't know it yet. Deputy Chief Reyes takes the ticket book gently, but firmly from Whitfield's unresisting hand. Officer, hand me your radio and your badge for the moment. You're going to come with me to the precinct, and we're going to sort out exactly what happened here, in full on the record. Chief, please, Now, Officer Whitfield. The crowd near the stairwell has gone completely silent, phone still raised, recording a moment that all of them can already tell is going to outlive the morning it happened in. Whitfield unclips his radio with hands that have started, very slightly, to shake, and hands it over along with his badge. And for the first time since Renee pulled her car onto level 2 40 minutes earlier, he says nothing at all. The Cedar Falls Police Department sits 4 blocks from the garage, a squat brick building with a flag that's seen better decades. And by the time Dale Whitfield walks through its doors that afternoon, badge and radio still in Deputy Chief Reyes's possession, word of what happened has already beaten him there. He can feel it the moment he steps inside. The desk sergeant doesn't quite meet his eyes. 2 officers near the break room stop talking when he passes. Somebody's phone is already open to a video. Diane Kessler's video, 12 seconds of it. Whitfield's voice clear as a bell saying nobody's coming to save you from a parking ticket. And it's not hard to guess, from the way people angle their screens away as he walks by, that it's already made its way around the building faster than any memo ever could. Reyes doesn't waste time. She walks him straight to a conference room on the 2nd floor, where a woman he's never met is already seated at the table with a folder open in front of her. Patricia Yoon, the department's internal affairs liaison, a woman with the flat, unreadable patience of someone who has sat across from 100 officers in exactly this position. Sit down, Officer Whitfield, Yoon says. He sits. I want to walk through this carefully, Yoon says, so there's no confusion later about what was said and what wasn't. Deputy Chief Reyes has already briefed me on the incident. I've also just gotten off the phone with the city manager's office and separately with legal counsel for Whitmore Municipal Parking Solutions. So before you say anything, I want you to understand, this is not a conversation where the facts are still soft. They're not. What we're determining now is how you respond to them. Whitfield swallows. I've made a judgment call out there. I've made 100 judgment calls in that garage. I didn't know who she was. That's precisely the problem, Reyes says, arms crossed, standing near the window rather than sitting. You didn't know who she was because you never asked. You didn't check a placard that was sitting in plain view on her dashboard. You didn't run her plate. You didn't request identification through proper channels before escalating to a tow. You wrote not 1 but 2 citations, one of which accuses a business owner of trespassing on property she holds the operating contract for, without doing a single piece of the verification our own procedures require before any tow or citation in that garage. I was following my instincts, Whitfield says. 2 years on that beat, I know what. You know what a person looks like when you've already decided they don't belong, Yoon says, not unkindly, but without softening it either. That's not instinct, Officer Whitfield. That's assumption. And it's not the first time this exact assumption has landed on my desk with your name attached to it. She slides a second folder across the table. Whitfield opens it, and his stomach drops somewhere below the floor. Complaints. 6 of them, spanning the past 18 months. A black delivery driver cited for loitering near his own truck. A Hispanic city contractor's assistant accused of using a fraudulent parking pass that turned out to be entirely legitimate. A woman, black, mid-30s, professionally dressed, who filed a complaint after Whitfield asked to see 3 separate forms of identification before accepting that she worked for the county clerk's office, despite the lanyard around her neck. Each complaint on its own had been logged, reviewed, and closed with a note. Insufficient evidence of misconduct. Officer discretion within policy. Every one of these was closed without action, Reyes says quietly, because on their own they looked like disagreements. A word against a word, but laid out together. Next, what happened this morning in front of 8 witnesses and a video recording, they don't look like isolated judgment calls anymore, Officer Whitfield. They look like a pattern, and a pattern is exactly what internal affairs is required to act on. Whitfield stares at the folder like it might rearrange itself into something less damning if he looks at it long enough. The woman today, she set me up. She stood there in jeans on purpose. She didn't say anything. If she'd just told me who she... Stop. Reyes's voice cuts through the room like a closing door. I need you to hear this clearly, officer, because it matters. Ms. Whitmore did not owe you her resume before you did your job correctly. She did not need to announce her net worth or her company's name for you to be required to check a placard before calling a tow truck. The procedure exists precisely so that it doesn't matter who's standing in front of you, contractor, city inspector, a woman running errands in sneakers. You check. You verify. You do the job the same way for everyone. The moment you decide someone doesn't warrant that basic courtesy based on how they're dressed or what they look like, you've already failed, regardless of what you find out about them 5 minutes later. The room is quiet except for the hum of the ceiling vent. What happens now? Whitfield says finally. It isn't quite a question. Hume closes the folder. Given the severity of today's incident, combined with the documented pattern, I'm recommending immediate suspension without pay, effective today, pending a full investigation. You'll surrender your badge and service weapon for the duration. You'll be required to complete department-mandated retraining on bias-free procedure and de-escalation before any possibility of reinstatement. And given the specifics of this incident, a contract holder for a city facility, publicly humiliated on video, in front of courthouse staff, I expect the city manager's office will have their own requirements as well, separate from ours. For how long? 30 days minimum, Reyes says. Possibly longer, depending on what the investigation turns up about those 6 prior complaints. And Officer Whitfield, I'll tell you plainly, because I think you need to hear it now rather than find out later. Your name has been on the list for a sergeant's promotion this quarter. That list is being revised as of this afternoon. Whitfield's hands, folded on the table in front of him, go very still. There's something else, Yoon adds, sliding one more sheet across the table. A printed email, time-stamped less than an hour ago. Whitmore Municipal Parking Solutions has formally requested, through council, that the department reimburse all towing and storage fees incurred this morning, and that those costs be drawn specifically from the department's disciplinary budget rather than general funds. The city manager's office has already approved the request. That comes out of Officer Discretionary Training Funds, Reyes confirms. Yes, the same funds that pay for department conferences, equipment upgrades, overtime allocation for community outreach. Every officer in this building is going to feel the edges of this, Officer Whitfield, in ways large and small, for months. That's not a threat. That's simply what happens when a mistake this public gets made by someone wearing this badge. Whitfield doesn't say anything for a long moment. When he finally speaks, his voice has lost every trace of the swagger it carried in the garage that morning. Is she going to press charges? Personally, I mean, against me. Reyes and Yoon exchange a brief look. I don't know, Reyes says honestly. I haven't asked her. But I'll tell you what I do know, Officer Whitfield. Whether she does or doesn't isn't really the question that should be keeping you up tonight. The question is how many people you treated exactly like you treated her over these past 2 years who didn't happen to own the building you were standing in. She stands, gathers both folders under her arm, and moves toward the door, turning your equipment at the front desk. You'll hear from us formally within 48 hours. The door closes behind her with a soft, final click, and Dale Whitfield sits alone at the table, staring at his own reflection in the dark screen of a turned-off monitor, hearing his own voice play back in his head on a loop he can't turn off. Nobody's coming to save you from a parking ticket. 3 days later, in a conference room on the 4th floor of Cedar Falls City Hall, the fallout takes on a shape that has nothing to do with badges or ticket books at all. City Manager Howard Pruitt sits at the head of a long table, a copy of the Whitmore Municipal Parking Solutions contract open in front of him, tabbed in 6 places with yellow flags. To his left sits the city's legal counsel, a careful woman named Priya Nair. To his right, Deputy Chief Angela Reyes, still in uniform, arms folded, jaw set. Across from all 3 of them sits Renee Whitmore, dressed today in a charcoal blazer instead of jeans, not because she needs to look like anything other than what she already is, but because this particular meeting calls for a different kind of armor, and she knows how to wear both. Ms. Whitmore, Pruitt begins. First, on behalf of the city, I want to apologize. What happened Tuesday morning was unacceptable, and it reflects poorly on this department in a way that goes well beyond one officer's conduct. I appreciate that, Renee says. But I'd rather talk about what happens next than what you're sorry about. Nair nods, opening her own folder. Section 14 of your contract with the city includes a compliance clause. Officer conduct standards for any personnel granted enforcement authority within contracted facilities. Given the events of Tuesday and the pattern of prior complaints Deputy Chief Reyes's office has now formally documented, the city is in breach of that clause. We want to walk you through the remedies we're prepared to put on the table and hear what you'd want beyond them. Go ahead, Renee says. Nair reads from the sheet in front of her, itemizing each point like a checklist being laid, brick by brick, on a table. 1. Officer Whitfield's 30-day suspension without pay is confirmed, effective immediately, with a formal letter of reprimand entered permanently into his personnel file, a mark that will follow him through any future promotion review for the remainder of his career with this department. 2. He is permanently reassigned off downtown parking liaison duty. He will not work inside any Whitmore-managed facility again, under any circumstance, for the duration of his employment with Cedar Falls PD. 3. He is required to complete a minimum of 40 hours of department-mandated bias awareness and procedural compliance retraining before any consideration of reinstatement to patrol duty, to be reviewed by an outside evaluator, not internal staff. 4. He has been removed from this quarter's sergeant promotion list. Given the pattern documented in the 6 prior complaints, Deputy Chief Reyes has recommended he not be reconsidered for promotion for a minimum of 2 full review cycles. 5. The department will reimburse all towing, storage, and administrative fees incurred by you personally on Tuesday, drawn from the Officer Discretionary Training and Equipment Fund rather than the general operating budget, a distinction the city manager's office insisted on, so that the cost is felt where the failure occurred. And 6, Nair says, closing the folder, the city is prepared to commission an independent audit of parking enforcement stop and citation data for the downtown garage corridor over the past 18 months, conducted by a third party of your choosing, with full findings shared with both your legal counsel and this office. Renee is quiet for a moment, turning the last item over. You're offering the audit voluntarily, she says. That's not standard, even for a breach like this. It's not, Pruitt admits. But Deputy Chief Reyes made the case internally, and I agreed with her. If there's a pattern in that garage, and I think we all already know there is, I would rather find out the full shape of it ourselves now than have it surface later in a lawsuit, a news story, or a viral video with a worse ending than the one we got. Renee nods slowly. I'll take the audit. I'd like input on selecting the third party, someone with no prior contracts with the city on either side. Agreed, Nair says. There's one more thing, Renee says, and she leans forward slightly, hands folded on the table. I'm not interested in Officer Whitfield losing his job over this. I want to be clear about that. Firing him quietly closes a file and makes this go away for the department. But it doesn't fix the 6 complaints sitting in that folder. And it doesn't fix whatever training gap let this go on for 18 months in the first place. What I want is bigger than one officer's paycheck. Reyes leans forward for the first time. What did you have in mind? A verification protocol, Renee says. Mandatory. For any officer assigned enforcement authority inside a contracted facility. Not just mine, any facility under city contract. Before a tow, before a citation involving trespassing or unauthorized presence, the officer confirms identity and authorization through an actual documented check, placard scan, ID verification, a call to the facility's on-duty manager if there's any doubt at all. Not instinct. Not what somebody looks like. A checklist that has to be completed and logged before enforcement action, the same way you'd log a use of force incident. Pruitt looks at Reyes. Reyes is already nodding. I can build that into department policy, Reyes says. Citywide, not just downtown. If Ms. Whitmore's legal team wants to help draft the language, I'd welcome it. This isn't the first complaint of this shape I've seen cross my desk. It's just the first one that ever made it far enough for anyone to actually look at all 6 together. Then let's do it right, Renee says. Not as punishment, as policy. Something that outlasts this news cycle and outlasts Officer Whitfield. and actually changes what happens the next time somebody who doesn't look the way an officer expects them to look pulls into a spot they have every right to be in. Pruitt closes the contract folder in front of him, the 6 yellow tabs still marking every point they've just walked through. Ms. Whitmore, he says, I think we can build that. Priya Nair is already writing. 3 weeks pass before Dale Whitfield finds the nerve to ask for the meeting. He does it through Deputy Chief Reyes, not directly, calls her office, asks if there's any way, any protocol, any channel that would let him speak to Renee Whitmore in person before his suspension review comes up. Reyes is skeptical at first. It's not standard, but she runs it past Renee's counsel, and Renee, after a day of consideration, agrees. Not because she owes him anything, because she's curious what a man like Whitfield says when the badge, the ticket book, and the crowd of onlookers are all gone, and it's just him sitting across a table, with nothing left to perform for. They meet in a small conference room at Whitmore Municipal Parking Solutions' modest headquarters, 3 blocks from the garage. No cameras. No deputy chief. Just Renee, seated at the head of a plain conference table, and Whitfield, out of uniform for the first time she's ever seen him, wearing a collared shirt that looks like it hasn't been ironed in a while. He sits down across from her and doesn't say anything for almost a full minute. I've had 3 weeks to think about what I'd say, he finally says. And I still don't think I've got it right. So I'm just going to say it plain. He looks at his hands on the table, not at her. I was wrong. Not wrong like I made a mistake filling out a form wrong. Wrong like I looked at you, and before you said a single word, I'd already decided what you were. And when you didn't act the way I expected somebody in that position to act, instead of stopping to ask myself if maybe I had it backwards, I just got louder. I got surer. I dug in. He shakes his head slowly. 19 years on the job, and I did the laziest thing a cop can do. I policed how somebody looked instead of what was actually true. Renee listens without interrupting, doesn't nod along, doesn't soften her face into forgiveness before he's finished. Just listens, the way she listened to him in the garage, fully, without performing a reaction for him to read. I read the file, he continues. The other 6 complaints. Reyes made me sit with all of them before this meeting. I told myself every single time that I had a reason. That guy looked like he didn't belong. That woman's badge looked fake. I had a story ready every time, and it always came out the same way. Somebody who didn't look the part in my head turned out to actually belong there. And I never once stopped to ask why my head kept getting it wrong in the exact same direction. He looks up at her now. I'm not asking you to make this easier than it is. I know what I did. I know what could have happened if you'd been somebody who didn't have a contract with the city sitting behind you, somebody who was just exactly who I assumed you were, with no company, no lawyer, no deputy chief coming to the garage. I think about that a lot, actually, more than I think about my own suspension, if I'm honest. That's the part that should scare you, Renee says quietly. Not what happened to me. What almost happened to someone who didn't have a level 2 contract to fall back on. I know. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I forgive you, she says, because I don't think that's actually what you're asking for, and it's not something I can hand you in one conversation anyway. What happened to me was 40 embarrassing minutes and a towing bill. What you've been doing for 2 years, according to that file, was a pattern, 6 people, at least, who didn't have the same landing I did when they hit the ground. I can't speak for them. I can only speak for what I saw. And what I saw was someone who decided who I was before he ever asked. Whitfield nods, jaw tight, saying nothing. I appreciate that you came here, Renee continues. I think it took something to sit across from me and say all of that without trying to soften it into something smaller than it was. But an apology, to me, doesn't undo the pattern. It's one conversation. The pattern needs more than a conversation. It needs the retraining Reyes has you doing. It needs the audit. It needs the policy we're building. So the next person who pulls into a spot they have every right to be in doesn't have to have my last name to get treated fairly. She pauses. I'm not going to fully forgive you today, Officer Whitfield. And I'm not going to tell you there's nothing left to earn back, either. I think that's honest. And I think it's more useful to you than me pretending otherwise. I understand, Whitfield says. And for the first time, there's no defensiveness left in his voice at all, just the flat, tired weight of a man hearing something true and choosing not to argue with it. I understand, but this isn't about one moment. It's a pattern. I get it now. I wish I'd gotten it 3 weeks ago, in that garage. Or 2 years ago, honestly. The first time one of those 6 complaints landed on somebody's desk. Renee stands, signaling the meeting's natural end. And for a moment neither of them moves to shake hands. It doesn't feel like the kind of conversation that closes that way. Finish the retraining, she says. Actually finish it, not just check the box. And Officer Whitfield, the next time somebody stands in front of you who doesn't look like what you expect, I hope you remember standing in this room today, and not just the version of you standing in that garage. She walks him to the door herself. He doesn't say anything else, just nods once and leaves, and the door closes behind him with a sound far quieter than the one it made in the Internal Affairs conference room 3 weeks earlier. No shame performed for an audience this time. No bravado left to fall from. Just a man walking out of a building alone, carrying the weight of a debt that a single conversation was never going to be enough to pay down. By late spring, the story of what happened in the Cedar Falls garage has mostly faded from local conversation the way these things do. A few weeks of talk, a news segment that ran once and didn't get a follow-up, a video that circulated for a while and then slid down everyone's feed under the weight of newer things. But inside City Hall and inside Whitmore Municipal Parking Solutions, the work is only just getting started. Renee spends 6 weeks in meetings that have nothing to do with press attention and everything to do with paperwork, the unglamorous, unphotogenic labor of actually changing how something works. She sits across from Priya Nair twice a week, drafting language for what's now being called, in official city documents, the Facility Access Verification Protocol. It's not a flashy name. It's not meant to be. It's meant to survive budget cycles, election turnovers, and the next 20 officers who rotate through downtown enforcement duty long after anyone remembers Dale Whitfield's name. The protocol itself is simple, almost stubbornly so. Before any officer initiates a tow, citation, or removal action inside a city-contracted facility, they are required to complete a documented 3-step check. Verify posted authorization signage or placards visible at the scene. Attempt identity confirmation through the facility's listed on-duty contact before escalating, and log the verification steps taken, timestamped, attached to the officer's badge number, before any enforcement action is finalized. If an officer skips a step, the action is automatically flagged for review. No complaint required to trigger it. The genius of it, Reyes tells the City Council subcommittee reviewing the proposal in May, is that it doesn't rely on somebody bothering to complain afterward. Most people don't. They eat the ticket, they eat the tow fee, they go home embarrassed and annoyed, and they never file anything, because filing a complaint against an officer feels like it costs more than it's worth. This protocol catches the failure at the moment it happens, not 6 months later when 18 months of pattern finally piles up high enough for somebody to notice. Renee sits in the back of the council chamber during the vote, dressed today in jeans again, no charcoal blazer required for this room, and watches the measure pass 7-0. It isn't dramatic. There's no crowd, no viral video, no tow truck idling in the background. Just 7 raised hands and a clerk logging the result into the record. And somewhere in that quiet administrative moment, something that outlasts one bad morning in a parking garage finally becomes real. She doesn't stop there. Working with Marcus, who she since promoted, giving him oversight of staff training across all 4 of her company's contracted garages, she builds a companion piece on her own side of the arrangement. Mandatory onboarding for any officer newly assigned to a Whitmore-managed facility, walking them through exactly what authority they do and don't have, who to call before escalating any enforcement action, and a direct line to a facility manager on duty at all hours. So no officer ever again has the excuse that nobody was available to check. You know what got me watching it happen? Marcus tells her one afternoon. The 2 of them reviewing training materials in her office wasn't even the tow. It was watching him decide, in like 4 seconds, exactly who you were, and then spend the next 30 minutes refusing to let a single fact talk him out of it. That's the part the protocol actually fixes. It doesn't ask an officer to have better instincts. It just doesn't let bad instincts skip the paperwork anymore. Renee nods slowly. That's exactly it. I never wanted this to be about proving Whitfield was a bad person. Plenty of people would have done exactly what he did in that garage, and plenty of them think of themselves as perfectly decent otherwise. The point was never to catch a villain. It was to build something that doesn't depend on every single officer, every single day, deciding on their own to be fair. It should just be how the job works. By June, 3 other municipal contractors in neighboring counties have reached out to Nair's office, asking for a copy of the protocol language to adapt for their own city contracts. Reyes fields 2 calls from police departments in different parts of the state, curious how it's held up in practice, whether it's slowed enforcement down in ways that create their own problems. It hasn't, mostly. A few officers grumble about the extra logging step. Most, according to Reyes, have quietly admitted it makes their job simpler, not harder. A clear checklist instead of a gray area they used to have to navigate by feel and by whatever assumptions they walked in carrying. Whitfield, meanwhile, completes his 40 hours of retraining in full, genuinely, according to the outside evaluator's report, not merely checking a box. He returns to patrol duty in June, reassigned to a residential beat on the far side of town, nowhere near downtown, nowhere near a Whitmore-managed facility. Reyes tells Renee in a brief update call that his file will carry the reprimand permanently, and that any future promotion review will require documented evidence of sustained, changed conduct, not just time served without another complaint. Renee doesn't ask for updates on him beyond that. She's built what she came to build. What happens next isn't hers to carry. 6 months after a tow truck hauled a paid-in full Buick out of Level 2 of the Cedar Falls Municipal Parking Garage, Marcus Bell arrives for his shift at 5:40 in the morning. Same as he has for 3.5 years, except now the badge clipped to his belt says shift supervisor under his name instead of attendant, and now there's a laminated card taped inside the glass booth that wasn't there before. 3 steps, numbered. The words Facility Access Verification Protocol printed across. The top in blue to match the company colors. He doesn't need the card. He helped write it. But he leaves it up anyway, because the officers rotating through downtown enforcement duty do need it, and because watching a new one read it, actually read it, top to bottom, before doing anything else, has become one of the small satisfactions of his week. This morning it's a young officer named Priest, maybe 6 months out of the academy, standing at the booth window with a photo of a car on his phone, asking Marcus to confirm whether the vehicle in question belongs to a registered contractor before he does anything about the expired-looking permit visible on the dash. "Give me the plate," Marcus says, already pulling up the tenant log on the monitor beside him. "You always this thorough this early?" Officer Priest asks, not unkindly, more curious than anything, the way someone asks about a habit they don't yet understand the weight of. Marcus doesn't look up from the screen right away. "Man, let me tell you something," he says. 6 months ago, I watched an officer tow a woman's car off Level 2 because he decided, before she said a single word, that she didn't belong up there. Turned out, she owned the building, owned the contract that put his badge in this garage in the first place. I stood right there and watched it happen, and I couldn't do a damn thing about it in the moment, because speaking up too early would have cost me my job and wouldn't have stopped the tow truck anyway." He finds the plate, cross-references it. Green checkmark. So yeah, I'm thorough. Because thorough is the only thing that would have stopped that morning from happening. And I don't ever want to stand behind this glass again and watch somebody get run over by somebody else's assumption. Officer Priest doesn't say anything for a second. Then, that the reason for all this? He nods toward the laminated card. "That's the whole reason," Marcus says. "Car's clear, by the way. Registered contractor. Permit renewed 2 weeks ago. Just hasn't updated the sticker yet. I'll flag it in the system so nobody else has to guess." It takes him 90 seconds. 90 seconds that, 6 months ago, might have ended with another vehicle on a flatbed and another person standing in a garage explaining themselves to someone who'd already stopped listening. Renee doesn't come by the garage as often now. Not because she stepped back. If anything, the last 6 months have been busier than any stretch of her career. 3 consulting calls a week with municipalities in 2 other states asking how the Facility Access Verification Protocol actually works in practice, whether it's replicable, whether it holds up when the novelty wears off and the officers stop being extra careful because everyone's watching. But she doesn't need to walk level 2 herself anymore to know what's happening on it. That used to be the whole problem, that the only way she could know how her garage actually treated people was to go stand in it unannounced and watch. Now the system watches for her. She still comes by, though. Once every couple of weeks, unannounced, same as always, jeans and a plain jacket, because old habits are hard to fully retire, and because she likes seeing the place function the way it's supposed to, without her having to be the one making it function. Today she finds Marcus in the booth, midway through his shift change paperwork, and leans against the doorframe the way she used to, when he was still just an attendant, and she was still just the owner nobody, on level 2 recognized on site. "How's the new kid?" she asks, meaning Priest, whose patrol car she passed on her way in. "Green." Good instincts, though. Actually read the card before he did anything, which puts him ahead of about half the officers we get rotating through. Marcus sets his pen down. "You want the real answer, or the short one?" "Real one." "Real one is, it's different in here now. Not just the paperwork. The feel of it." He searches for the word for a second. People used to walk through this garage a little braced. You could see it, if you were paying attention, the way somebody tense up a little when a squad car rolled through, especially if they didn't look like they matched whatever picture an officer might have had in his head about who belongs in a place like this. I don't see that anymore. Not the way I used to. Officers check the placard, check the log. They don't just walk up and decide. And people can feel that difference, even if they couldn't tell you exactly why. It changes how a place feels to stand in. He glances toward the ground floor, where a woman in scrubs is badging through the pedestrian gate toward the elevator, unhurried, unbothered. The most ordinary thing in the world. "That's the whole thing you built," Marcus says. "Not just that Whitfield got dealt with. Any of us could have told you plenty of guys like him roll through here eventually. It's that it doesn't matter as much anymore who rolls through. The protocol doesn't ask them to be a good person before they show up. It just doesn't let them skip the parts that would have stopped that morning from happening, whether they mean well or not." Renee is quiet for a moment, watching the woman in scrubs disappear into the elevator, watching the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday morning move the way it's supposed to. "That's exactly what I wanted," she says finally. "I never needed people to become better. I needed the building to stop depending on it." Deputy Chief Reyes calls that same afternoon with an update Renee half expected and is still glad to hear stated plainly. The department's own internal audit, conducted independently at Reyes's insistence, 6 months out from the incident specifically, so the numbers couldn't be dismissed as a temporary overcorrection, shows enforcement action complaints from contracted facilities down sharply citywide, not just at Whitmore-managed garages. 2 other private facility operators in Cedar Falls have adopted verification language modeled on Renee's protocol without being asked to, simply because officers themselves started expecting it and found the ones that didn't have it frustrating to work with by comparison. You built something that made the job easier for the officers who were already trying to do it right, Reyes tells her. That's usually how you know something's actually going to stick. It's not fighting the system. It's just removed the gray area that used to let the worst version of the job slide through unnoticed. Renee thanks her, ends a call, and sits for a moment in her office with the quiet particular satisfaction of watching something outlast the moment that caused it. No cameras rolling, no crowd of courthouse staff gathered to witness it, just a number on an audit report and a young officer reading a laminated card before he decides anything about a stranger's car. Marcus's words stay with her longer than the audit numbers do, though. It doesn't matter as much anymore who rolls through. She thinks about the version of that morning 6 months ago, where nobody had been watching closely enough to write it down, where Whitfield's instinct had simply been allowed to run its course the way it always had before, unremarked, unrecorded, absorbed by whoever happened to be standing in a garage that day with no institution behind them to catch the fall. That was never really about Dale Whitfield. In the end, he was just the version of the problem that happened to be standing in front of her that particular Tuesday. The problem itself was older than him and would have outlasted him, too, if nothing had changed except one man's reassignment. What she'd built instead didn't ask the next 100 officers to be better than he was. It just made sure the next 100 mornings couldn't go the way that one had. By the following spring, almost a full year after a tow truck pulled away from level 2, with Renee Whitmore's Buick still warm from the engine, the Facility Access Verification Protocol has a name nobody in Cedar Falls uses anymore, because outside city limits, people just call it the Whitmore Protocol, and it has stopped being a Cedar Falls story at all. It starts small, the way these things usually do. A municipal contractor 2 counties over, managing a parking structure attached to a regional hospital, adapts the 3-step language almost word for word after a resident complaint eerily similar to Renee's own. A nurse's car towed from a reserved medical staff space because an officer assumed, on site, that a black woman in scrubs couldn't be the neurologist, whose name was printed on the placard she'd forgotten was face down on her dashboard. The contractor's operations manager finds Prionair's public case file on the Cedar Falls protocol while researching how other cities had handled similar disputes, calls her office directly, and asks, more or less, how do we get what you have? Nair send the language. Free. No licensing fee, no consulting retainer attached, because when Renee had first drafted it with Nair's office, she'd insisted on exactly one condition, that any city or contractor who wanted it could have it, unmodified in its core requirements, at no cost. If it only exists because Cedar Falls can afford outside consultants, she told Nair at the time, then it's not actually solving anything. It's just proving that money buys dignity. I don't want to build something that only works for people who can pay for it. By the 1-year mark, 6 municipalities across 2 states have adopted some version of the protocol. Reyes fields calls from 4 different police departments asking not whether it works. The data from Cedar Falls has made that argument for itself by now. But how to get their union representatives on board with an extra logging step that, on paper, sounds like more paperwork and in practice, according to every department that's actually implemented it, ends up saving officers time they used to spend fielding complaints, sitting through internal affairs interviews, defending decisions they'd made in 4 seconds and regretted for months afterward. It's not really a burden once you're inside it, Reyes tells a skeptical captain from a department 300 miles away, on a call Renee happens to be sitting in on. It's a burden to build. It's relief to use. Ask any officer here who's had it running for 6 months whether they'd go back to the old way, where they had to make every single call on instinct and hope their instinct held up under review. Most of them will tell you no. The protocol isn't there to catch them being bad at their jobs. It's there so being good at their jobs doesn't depend entirely on what kind of morning they're having, or what they assumed about somebody before they'd said a word. Marcus gets a call of his own that spring, a facilities management conference 2 states away, asking if he'd be willing to speak on a panel about implementing verification protocols from the ground level, from the perspective of the person standing behind the glass who has to make the thing actually work day to day, not just the executives who write the policy. He says yes before he's fully thought through what it means to stand in front of a room of strangers and tell them what he watched happen to Renee 6 months earlier, when he was still just an attendant with no power to stop a tow truck from doing what a tow truck had already been told to do. He tells the story anyway, in a conference hotel ballroom, to an audience of facility managers and municipal officials he's never met. He doesn't perform it. He tells it the way he told Officer Priest, plainly, without theater, because a story doesn't need theater. It needs someone willing to say, out loud, that he watched it happen and couldn't stop it, and that the only thing that would have stopped it was a system that didn't depend on him being brave enough to intervene in real time. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty, he tells the room, near the end, for not saying something sooner that morning. And for a while I did. But the truth is, speaking up sooner wouldn't have stopped that tow truck. The officer had already decided. What actually changed things wasn't one person being braver in one moment. It was building something that doesn't need anybody to be brave in that moment ever again. That's the only kind of fix that actually holds. Renee doesn't attend the conference. She's in Cedar Falls that week, back the garage on a Tuesday morning for one of her unannounced walkthroughs, jeans and a plain jacket. The same as always, watching an officer she's never met check a placard against a tenant log before saying a single word to the driver standing beside a perfectly legally parked car. It takes him under 2 minutes. He apologizes for the delay, tells the driver to have a good day, and moves on to the next level. Nobody in that exchange knows who Renee is. Nobody needs to. That's the part that still catches her, standing there, not the 2-minute check itself, ordinary and unremarkable as it's become, but the fact that it no longer requires her presence, or her ownership, or her name on a contract to happen the right way. A year ago, the only thing standing between a stranger and an assumption was whatever instinct that officer happened to walk in carrying that day. Now there's a system standing there instead, doing the work that instinct used to do badly, quietly, in the background, whether or not she's watching. She thinks about that word, watching, more than she expected to, in the year since. So much of what happened to her that first morning came down to the fact that Whitfield believed, with total confidence, that nobody of consequence was watching him decide who she was. That's what confidence like his is built on. In the end, not certainty that he was right, but certainty that being wrong would cost him nothing, because nobody positioned to correct him was paying attention. What she'd built in the year since wasn't really a system for catching bad officers, though it did that too, eventually, in the handful of cases where it mattered. What she'd really built was a way of making sure somebody was always watching, not a person standing in a garage hoping to witness the right moment, but a structure that didn't blink, didn't get tired, didn't decide in advance who deserved the benefit of the doubt and who didn't. She stands at the railing on level 2, near the spot where her own car had once been, and watches the garage do, on an ordinary Tuesday with no cameras and no crowd and no reason for anyone to be paying particular attention, exactly what it's supposed to do. "You don't have to see me to know I'm still here," she says quietly, to no one in particular. The words more for herself than for anyone standing near enough to hear them. You just have to build something that doesn't need you to. Then she walks back toward the elevator, an ordinary woman in jeans and a plain jacket, disappearing into a building that no longer needs her watching it to work the way it's supposed to. There's a particular kind of story that gets told about power in America, and it usually goes like this. Someone underestimated turns out to have more standing than the person doing the underestimating. The tables turn. The audience feels a jolt of satisfaction. And the story ends there, on the reveal, on the moment the badge comes out or the phone call comes in or the crowd gathers to watch someone powerful get humbled in public. It's a good story. It's satisfying in the way justice is supposed to be satisfying. But it's also, if you stop there, an incomplete one, because the reveal only tells you that one person, on one morning, got caught. It doesn't tell you what happens to the next 100 mornings, the ones nobody happens to be filming, the ones where the person on the receiving end of somebody's snap judgment doesn't happen to own the building. That's the part of Renee Whitmore's story that matters more than the moment Deputy Chief Reyes said her name out loud in front of a gathering crowd on level 2 of a downtown parking garage. The reveal was real, and it was earned. And Dale Whitfield's face in the second, before he understood what he'd done, is a moment worth remembering. The particular way arrogance folds in on itself when it finally meets a fact it can't talk its way around. But if a story had ended there, with consequences handed down and an apology offered and accepted at arm's length, it would have been a story about one bad officer getting what was coming to him. Satisfying maybe, but small. The kind of story that changes nothing for the next Renee Whitmore, who doesn't happen to hold a city contract, who doesn't happen to have a deputy chief's direct line, who just eats the toffee and goes home and tells herself it isn't worth the fight. What makes this story worth telling all the way through isn't the humiliation Whitfield experienced, though he experienced it, and though he deserved to reckon with it. What makes it worth telling is what Renee built out of the wreckage of that morning. Not a punishment, but a structure. Not a way of making sure Dale Whitfield personally never did it again, but a way of making sure the next 100 officers who rotate through that garage never get the chance to, whether they mean well or not, whether anyone happens to be watching or not. That distinction sits at the center of everything Renee says, over and over, in slightly different words, throughout this story. To Marcus, in her office, reviewing training materials. I never wanted this to be about proving Whitfield was a bad person. The point was never to catch a villain. It was to build something that doesn't depend on every single officer, every single day, deciding on their own to be fair. To herself, standing at the railing on level 2 a year later, watching a stranger check a placard against a tenant log without a second thought. I needed the building to stop depending on it. It's a quieter kind of justice than the one these stories usually deliver. And it's easy to miss if you're only watching for the dramatic beat, the radio call, the badge, the crowd going still. But it's the more durable kind. Punishment ends when the sentence is served. A structure keeps working long after everyone involved in building it has moved on to something else, long after the story itself has been mostly forgotten by everyone except the people who live through it and the people who benefit from it every single day, without ever knowing why. Consider what actually happened to Whitfield, stripped down to its plainest terms. 30 days without pay, a permanent reprimand, mandatory retraining, a reassignment away from downtown enforcement, a promotion track now contingent on demonstrated change rather than simply time served without another complaint. Real consequences. Consequences with teeth, consequences that cost him something concrete and lasting. But none of it on its own would have stopped the next officer with Whitfield's exact blind spot from making Whitfield's exact mistake 6 months later, in a different garage, against a different woman who didn't happen to own the contract. Consequences correct the person. They don't correct the condition that produced him. The condition was never really about Dale Whitfield's individual character, and the story is careful, throughout, not to pretend otherwise. Marcus says it plainly to Officer Priest in the booth. Plenty of people would have done exactly what Whitfield did that morning, and plenty of them think of themselves as perfectly decent otherwise. That's not an excuse for Whitfield. The story never once asks the audience to feel sorry for him, never softens what he did or how long he'd apparently been getting away with doing it. It's something colder and more useful than an excuse. It's a diagnosis. The problem wasn't one man's malice. It was a system with no mechanism for catching an assumption before it became an action. A garage, a badge, a moment of unchecked authority, and nothing standing between an officer's snap judgment and its consequences except whether the person on the receiving end happened to have enough standing to make the mistake expensive. Renee didn't have the power to make every officer in Cedar Falls a better person. Nobody has that power, and any story that pretends otherwise is selling something. What she had was the standing and the resources and the specific hard-won knowledge of exactly where the gap in the system sat, to close that gap for good, not through better instincts, but through a structure that didn't need instincts to be trusted in the first place. Verify the placard. Attempt confirmation before escalating. Log the steps, time-stamped, attached to a badge number, flagged automatically if any step gets skipped. It sounds almost too simple to matter on paper. But simple is exactly what makes it durable. It doesn't rely on any individual officer having a change of heart. It doesn't rely on any individual bystander being brave enough to intervene in the moment, the way Marcus, watching it happen in real time with no power to stop it, couldn't be. It just makes the failure visible the instant it happens, whether anyone files a complaint or not, which matters enormously, because as Reyes says to the City Council Subcommittee, most people don't file complaints. They eat the toffee. They go home embarrassed and annoyed, and they never say a word, because the cost of speaking up feels higher than the cost of simply absorbing the injustice and moving on. A system built to depend on complaints is a system built to miss almost everything. That's the real ripple in this story's epilogue, and it's worth sitting with a little longer than the satisfaction of Whitfield's comeuppance. A protocol built in Cedar Falls in the aftermath of one woman's ordinary Tuesday morning spreads on its own, without a marketing budget or a licensing fee, because Renee insisted from the beginning that it be available to anyone who needed it, free, unmodified in its core requirements, because, in her words, a fix that only works for people who can afford outside consultants isn't actually a fix. It's just proof that money buys dignity, dressed up as progress. 6 municipalities adopt it within a year. Police departments hundreds of miles away call Reyes's office not to ask whether it works, but how to get skeptical officers on board with it, and end up hearing from officers who've already lived inside it for 6 months that it isn't a burden at all. It's relief. It's the difference between making every single call on raw instinct, alone, and hoping it holds up under review months later, versus having a clear checklist that protects the officer as much as it protects the person standing in front of them. That's the detail worth holding on to longest. Maybe the protocol doesn't only protect people like Renee from officers like Whitfield. It protects officers like Priest, and eventually even officers like Whitfield, from becoming the version of themselves that a bad morning and an unchecked assumption might otherwise let them become. Nobody in this story is asked to be a hero. Marcus isn't asked to risk his job speaking up in the heat of the moment. Renee isn't asked to announce her identity to defend herself. The officers who inherit the new system aren't asked to be better people than Whitfield was. Everyone is simply given a structure that makes doing the right thing the default, the easy path, the path of least resistance, instead of the thing that requires exceptional courage or exceptional decency to choose in a moment that offers no time to think it through. That's what separates a story about revenge from a story about repair. Revenge ends when the person responsible has suffered enough to satisfy the people watching. Repair doesn't end at all. It keeps running quietly in the background. A laminated card in a booth window, a logging step an officer grumbles about for a week, and then stops noticing. A nurse's placard checked properly before anyone decides anything about who she is. On an ordinary morning nobody will ever bother telling a story about, because nothing went wrong. That absence of a story, the ordinary, uneventful, unremarkable morning that used to be anything but guaranteed, is the entire point. It's the thing worth building. It's the thing worth every unglamorous, unphotogenic hour Renee spent in meetings that had nothing to do with press attention and everything to do with paperwork nobody would ever put in a headline. Renee's last line, standing alone at the railing on level 2 a year later, is easy to miss if you're listening for something bigger. Asterisk, you don't have to see me to know I'm still here. You just have to build something that doesn't need you to. Asterisk, it isn't a line about vindication. It's a line about what she chose to do with vindication once she had it, not to keep standing in that garage forever, making sure by sheer force of presence that nobody made her mistake again, but to build something sturdy enough that her presence stopped being necessary at all. That's the quiet ending underneath the loud one. Not a woman finally seen and believed, though she was. A system built so thoroughly that being seen and believed stops, depending on who you happen to be. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way through. If it moved you even a little, a like and a subscribe genuinely helps stories like this one reach more people. And I've got 2 more hand-picked stories coming up next that I think you're going to want to see. Stick around.